Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room hummed with low voices, boots dragging against the floor, chairs scraping in a rhythm that felt almost dismissive. Men leaned in close, trading remarks over maps, pens tapping against laminated surfaces, strategy being dissected in shorthand codes. No one looked in her direction. She sat still, back straight, eyes forward. Her uniform was crisp, her notes sharper than anyone else on that table. But in that room of clipped voices and seasoned egos, she might as well have been invisible. It wasn't the first time. The colonel spoke with his hands, pointing at positions circled in red, arrows streaking across borders that weren't lines but blood-soaked trails. The others nodded, chimed in with quick opinions, argued briefly, then moved on. When she spoke, just once, her voice steady, her observation clear, it was drowned under a cough, a chair squeak, a louder suggestion voiced right after hers. Her jaw tight, she wrote her note anyway. She didn't push, she never pushed. Because she'd learned something most of them hadn't. Recognition didn't always come when you spoke. Sometimes it came when you acted. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Outside the hangar-turned briefing room, the morning air cut cold. Diesel fumes drifted from idling transports, mixing with the faint metallic tang of spent casings that lingered no matter how many times the gravel had been raked. She adjusted her cap, stepped out into that harsh light, and for a moment, just a moment, let herself breathe. A voice caught her. "You don't say much, do you?" It was Ramirez, younger than her by 4 years, eyes that carried exhaustion deeper than his age should allow. He leaned against the door frame, cigarette unlit between his fingers. His smile wasn't mocking, more like searching. She shrugged. "No one listens much." He tilted his head. "Maybe they will when it matters." The words stayed with her as she crossed the yard, boots crunching gravel, shadows stretching long. That night she lay on her cot, staring at the canvas roof of the tent. The generator hummed outside, steady and low, like a heartbeat not her own. Her thoughts wandered back, further than she wanted. Back to a flag folded in a triangle. Back to a graveside where her mother clutched silence tighter than her hand. Back to the look in her younger brother's eyes, wide, confused, betrayed, that his sister was already thinking of following the same path that had stolen their father. She told no one here why she enlisted. Not really. They thought she was chasing glory. They thought she was stubborn. Maybe some thought she was reckless. The truth was simpler. The flag had always felt heavier in her hands than in anyone else. And dignity, her father had said once, the night before his last deployment, wasn't something anyone gave you. It was something you carried, whether or not they noticed. She carried it now, quietly, alone. The mission was set for dawn. A convoy would cross disputed ground, delivering not weapons but medicine, desperately needed, rarely safe. Rumors circled of an ambush. Insurgents had eyes everywhere. The path was narrow, exposure certain. Most of the men saw it as another assignment. She saw it as a test. The night wind whispered through the canvas. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness a face flickered. A girl, 12 years old, in a village she'd passed through on her last deployment. Dirt-streaked cheeks, bare feet, a shy glance that carried centuries of resilience. She'd given the girl half her rations that day. The girl had whispered thank you, in a language not her own but in a tone she'd never forgotten. That was why this convoy mattered. Not the maps, not the briefings, the faces. The silent, uncounted lives who never made it into the reports. Dawn broke with a sky washed pale. She stood near the lead vehicle, rifle slung, helmet snug, breath visible in the cool air. Engines rumbled low. The others adjusted gear, checked radios, cursed under their breath at the cold. No one asked her to lead. No one acknowledged she was the most meticulous with routes, the most disciplined with signals, the one who noticed details others skimmed over. They placed her mid-column, neither trusted nor doubted, just tolerated. But she didn't mind. Not today. because today something was going to shift. The convoy rolled out, tires grinding over dirt, the landscape a canvas of dust and jagged rock. The air smelled of iron and distance. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by static on the comms. Hours stretched, nothing moved but the horizon. Until a shadow flickered on the ridge. Her eyes caught it, a figure too still, too deliberate, the kind of stillness that screamed intent. Her chest tightened. She reached for her radio, but the captain's voice cut in first, curt, dismissive. "Stay sharp, people. No chatter unless necessary." She hesitated, her finger hovered. The convoy kept moving. Another flicker, this time 2 figures, then 3. Her pulse climbed. She didn't call it out. Not yet. She knew the pattern. If she was wrong, they'd roll their eyes, chalk it up to nerves. If she was right and they weren't ready. She steadied her breath, waited, watched. And then it came, the crack of a rifle echoing across stone. The lead windshield shattered. Screams cut the hum of engines. Chaos tore through the convoy like shrapnel. She was already moving. Out of the vehicle before orders came, sliding behind cover, scope raised. Dust filled the air, sharp and suffocating. Her eye found the ridge, shapes darting between rocks, calculated, patient. The ambush was no rumor, it was here, unfolding with deadly precision. Positions, the captain barked too late. She spotted the shooter, breath slowed, finger tightened. A single shot rang out, slicing the chaos with clarity. The figure dropped. No one saw her make it, they only saw the result. She didn't care. Another shot cracked, then another. She shifted, steadied, answered with silence that spoke louder than any briefing table. Minutes blurred, bullets and shouts, dust and blood, the sickening weight of choices made too fast to second guess. She moved like instinct, precise, quiet, unseen. And when the ridge finally fell silent, when the last figure vanished into retreat, when the convoy staggered back into uneasy stillness, she lowered her rifle, heart hammering, breath ragged. Around her the others caught their breath, cursed, checked wounds, shouted into radios. No one turned to her, no one said her name. But she saw it, in their eyes, a flicker, a question. Who had kept them alive? She didn't answer. She only gathered her gear, brushed dust from her sleeve, and stepped back into the column. Because it wasn't about credit. It was about dignity. And dignity didn't need applause. Not here, not yet. But something in her chest shifted. A reminder that though the flag might not carry her name, she carried it higher than they'd ever know. The convoy moved on. The road stretched long, and though silence wrapped her again, it was different now. Because silence, she realized, could be power. And this was only the beginning. How do you keep moving when the silence weighs heavier than the gunfire? That question echoed in her chest long after the convoy rolled back into base. Dust still clung to her sleeves. The smell of gunpowder lingered, stubborn, even as engines died and boots scattered across the yard. The wounded were carried out, curses and groans cutting through the air. Medics worked quickly, voices sharp, urgent. She stepped down from the truck without a word. No one stopped her. No one thanked her. The captain's voice barked instructions, containment, reports, repairs. Her name wasn't spoken. And yet she felt their eyes, quick glances darting away when she turned. Unspoken recognition, sealed behind lips that refused to admit it. She didn't need their words. She told herself that again and again. But in the quiet of her tent, boots off, rifle cleaned with meticulous care, the thought slipped in anyway. Why was credit so hard to give? She remembered her father's words. Dignity isn't a medal. It's the way you stand when no one claps. Still, some nights, clapping would have been easier. The lamp burned low, shadows trembling on canvas. She leaned back against her cot, rifle parts spread before her, each motion practiced steady. And her mind, whether she wanted it or not, wandered. Back home. Her brother's voice had been the last tether to a place that felt like another life. Younger, angry, full of questions he never asked straight but always implied. She could still see him on the porch that night, jaw tight, eyes accusing. Why you two? Wasn't one enough? She had no answer, just silence, and he had stormed off, slamming the screen door so hard it rattled in its frame. Her mother hadn't tried to stop either of them. Her mother never tried anymore. A folded flag on the mantel had done that. Her father had been buried with honors, the kind that made neighbors line the street and strangers salute. But honors couldn't fill the empty chair at dinner. Honors couldn't quiet the hollow ache of absence. She had stood at that graveside, uniform borrowed from ROTC, spine stiff, fingers digging into her palms so hard they left marks. She promised herself something that day. Not to replace him, not to follow his shadow, but to carry what he carried without waiting for anyone to notice. That was the difference. Not glory, not recognition, just dignity. And now here she was, thousands of miles away, rifle parts glinting under a weak lamp, silence pressing against her ribs. The zipper rasped at the tent entrance. Ramirez stepped in, ducking low, his boots dragged heavy. He smelled of smoke and antiseptic, faint traces of blood on his sleeves. He looked tired, more than tired. "You saved us out there." His voice was quiet. She didn't look up. "I was doing my job." "Funny," he said, dropping onto the cot across from hers. "The ones who do the most never call it a job." Her hands stilled on the rifle. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You saw them before anyone else. You took the first shot. Without you, we'd have been picking up more bodies." Silence stretched between them. Finally she spoke. "Why are you telling me?" He smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was something harder. "Because no one else will, not here, not now, but someone should." His words landed heavier than she expected. She nodded barely, then returned to her rifle. Ramirez stayed a while. He talked, about nothing, about everything. About home. About a girl waiting for him who probably wasn't waiting anymore. About a letter he kept folded in his pocket but never answered. She listened. Not because she knew what to say, but because sometimes listening was the only thing a person could give. When he left, the silence returned, but it felt less sharp. The next morning, orders came. Another route, another convoy, but this time her name was on a different list. Sniper detail, high ground, cover fire. It wasn't recognition, not really, more like necessity disguised as strategy, but it was a shift, a crack in the wall of indifference. She didn't smile, but inside something flickered. The climb to the ridge was brutal. Loose rock, thin air, sun burning without mercy. She carried her rifle like an extension of herself, each step measured, steady. Sweat traced down her spine, grit stuck to her lips, but her mind was sharper than the terrain. Up there the world stretched wide. Convoys below looked like toy trucks, dust trails curling like smoke signals. She set up her scope, adjusted her breath, melted into the rock as if she belonged there. And in the stillness, she felt it again, that strange mix of isolation and control. Alone, unseen, but holding the thread that tied life and death for the men below. Hours passed, nothing moved but shadows. Until movement, subtle, a glint of glass where there shouldn't be, the faint outline of a weapon shifting behind scrub. She steadied, focused, breath in, breath out. But she hesitated, just a second. Because through the scope the figure came into focus, and it wasn't a man. It was a boy, 15, maybe 16, rifle too big for his frame, eyes wide, desperate, not trained but driven. Her chest tightened. The convoy rolled below, unaware. Her finger hovered. Every calculation screamed what she had to do, but something in her, the part that remembered her brother's eyes, accusing and lost, made her pause. The boy's hands shook. He wasn't aiming, not really. He was scared, forced. Her pulse thundered. She had seconds. and then another figure stepped behind him. Older, hard eyes, guiding the boy's hands, forcing him to steady the weapon. She exhaled, the choice made itself. One shot. The older man fell. The boy stumbled, dropped the rifle, scrambled back into the rocks, disappearing like a shadow swallowed by the earth. The convoy kept moving, safe, unaware. She lowered the scope, heart pounding. No one saw her decision. No one knew she had spared someone who might one day come back with vengeance. No one would ever know the war she fought in that single breath. But she knew, and it would stay with her. As the sun dropped, painting the horizon in blood and fire, she packed her rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and began the long climb down. The men cheered when the convoy rolled in intact. The captain praised efficiency, coordination, timing. He didn't look at her. But Ramirez did. He caught her eye across the yard, just a nod, small, quiet enough. She nodded back. That night, alone again, she lay on her cot staring at the dark, and the boy's face returned, his eyes, his shaking hands. She wondered if he'd remember her the way she remembered him. She wondered if mercy was weakness, or if weakness was what they had all forgotten how to feel. Sleep never came, only questions. And in the silence, she realized something her father had never told her, something she would have to learn herself. Dignity wasn't just about carrying weight unseen. It was about the choices no one else witnessed, the ones that haunted you in the quiet. And those choices, she thought, might be the heaviest of all. What do you do when silence begins to follow you like a shadow? She asked herself that question on the third night after the ridge. The base was restless, laughter in one corner, frustration in another, but around her, silence. Not just the kind that came when men didn't bother to listen. This was different. This was the silence of suspicion. They didn't say it outright, but she felt it in the pauses, in the sidelong looks. They knew she'd been up there. They knew she'd taken shots. But how many? At who? And why had the convoy returned without a single confirmed body besides the one? She cleaned her rifle anyway, wiped dust from the glass of her scope, ran oiled cloth over metal until it gleamed. Precision was her refuge. Ramirez dropped into the chair across from her, pushing a steaming mug toward her. The coffee was thin, bitter, barely drinkable, but it was warm. "You look like hell," he said softly. She didn't look up. "So do you." He chuckled under his breath. "Fair, but you're carrying something heavier than I am." Her hands paused on the rifle. "What makes you think that?" He leaned back, tilting the chair onto two legs, balancing precariously. "Because I watch. The others, they don't. They only see what they want. I see what they don't." She studied him for a moment. His face was worn, eyes shadowed, but there was something steady in the way he looked at her. Not judgment, not suspicion, just recognition. "You ever think," he said after a pause, "that maybe dignity is just another word for loneliness?" The words landed harder than she expected. She turned back to the rifle, but the thought wouldn't leave. Loneliness. Maybe that was it. Carrying without applause, choosing without confession, enduring without witness. Was that dignity or just isolation dressed in pride? She didn't answer him. He didn't press. The next morning, orders shifted. Intelligence suggested a weapons cache hidden in the hills north of the border. It wasn't a convoy this time. It was a strike. Fast, quiet, surgical. She was assigned Overwatch again. Ramirez on point with the ground team. The hills were cruel. Rock cut into boots, sun baked into skin. The team moved slow, careful, every crunch of gravel sounding like thunder in her ears as she climbed above them. She set her rifle, adjusted her angle. The valley stretched below like an open hand. Hours passed. Sweat stung her eyes, flies buzzed relentless. The team moved closer, slipping between boulders, shadows lengthening as the sun slid lower. Then it happened. A figure stepped from the rocks ahead of the team. A man, weapon slung, posture too relaxed for a fighter. He raised one hand, palm out. The team froze. Through her scope she saw his face. Weathered eyes tired. He said something, words she couldn't hear but tone she could feel. It wasn't aggression, it was warning. Another figure appeared. Then another. Civilians, not fighters. Women, children, emerging from the rocks from hidden paths. A village tucked into the hills unseen on any map. The team leader cursed over the radio. This isn't right. Intel said cash, not people. Her scope swept the ridge beyond. Nothing, no weapons, no threats, just hollow eyes and thin frames. But her gut twisted, because she knew what the men below didn't. She'd seen this pattern before. Civilians out front, fighters in the shadows, human shields woven into ambushes. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Movement, the glint of steel from behind a rock barely visible. She caught it. A rifle barrel. Contact, she began into the radio. But then a child stumbled into her scope. A girl, maybe 8. She looked up wide-eyed, lips cracked from thirst. The rifle shifted behind her, ready to fire. Her chest tightened. If she took the shot, she'd hit the shooter, but the girl was in the line. If she didn't, Ramirez and the team would walk straight into fire. Seconds stretched. Her heart pounded so hard it blurred her vision. She adjusted, shifted her aim, tried to thread the impossible angle. Breath in, breath out. The shot cracked. The shooter dropped. The girl froze, hands over her ears, then ran, stumbling back toward the cluster of women. The team surged forward, securing ground, shouting in chaos. More shots rang out, a short exchange, then silence again. Her hands shook as she lowered the rifle. No one knew how close it had been. No one saw the razor edge she'd walked between duty and disaster. But she knew. Later back at camp, the report called it efficient. Clean, minimal casualties, effective overwatch. Her name wasn't in the report. But Ramirez found her by the water drums, sweat still drying on his brow. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, drinking, watching the sun sink low. Finally he said, "You made the shot, didn't you?" She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. Instead, he told her about a boy he'd met in a different village. Too young to fight, too old to stay innocent. He'd given the boy his last cigarette just to see him smile. Weeks later, that same boy had been found with a rifle in his hands. "Sometimes," Ramirez said quietly, "we don't save them, not really. We just delay what the world makes of them." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "So what's the point?" He shrugged. "Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the point is just trying anyway." She wanted to scoff, to push the thought away. But it lingered because it wasn't hope. It wasn't glory. It was just trying, even when it didn't matter. That night, she dreamed again of her brother. He was older in the dream, standing on the porch, uniform on his shoulders. He looked at her with the same accusing eyes, but this time he didn't speak. He just held out the folded flag. She woke with her chest tight, hands gripping her blanket so hard it tore. The mission had been called a success, but she couldn't shake the image of that little girl, hands over her ears, running from a shot she would never know had spared her life. And in that silence, the question returned. What do you do when the weight of dignity feels like it's crushing you? She didn't have the answer yet, but she knew the weight wasn't getting lighter, and the war around her wasn't slowing down. How do you prepare for a mission you know is built on lies? That thought struck her as the colonel laid out the next operation on the board. His voice was steady, clipped, the way men spoke when they wanted certainty to drown out doubt. The target was simple on paper, a compound suspected of stockpiling weapons, feeding the ambushes that had chewed at their convoys for weeks. Simple, clean, direct. But she could see it in the maps, the way the intel was drawn from half-whispers and shaky surveillance, the way coordinates shifted between reports, never lining up exactly. She saw the holes because she looked for them, and because holes had a way of swallowing people whole. No one asked her opinion, not once. She sat at the table, quiet as usual, listening to men who trusted volume more than accuracy. The plan was set. No room for hesitation. After the briefing, Ramirez found her by the gear racks. His expression said enough. "You don't buy it," he muttered. She shook her head. "It doesn't add up." He sighed, slinging his vest over one shoulder. "Doesn't have to. We go where they tell us." She looked at him then, sharp. "And when they're wrong?" He paused. His silence was answer enough. That night she lay awake again, the hum of generators seeping through canvas. But her mind wasn't in the base. It was home again at that porch, with her brother's voice ringing in her head. "Why you two? Wasn't one enough?" She had left him angry, left him with questions she never answered. Because she couldn't. Because the truth was too heavy to put into words. She wasn't here for medals. Not for recognition. She was here because if someone didn't carry the weight with dignity, then the flag they buried her father under meant nothing. And she couldn't let it mean nothing. The mission launched at dawn. Blackout trucks carried them through dust and silence, headlights dimmed, radios muted. She rode in the back, rifle resting against her knee, heart packing a rhythm she couldn't slow. Ramirez sat across from her, eyes closed, lips moving faintly, maybe a prayer, maybe just the whisper of someone trying to anchor themselves. The compound rose from the valley floor like a scar. Walls patched with tin, roofs sagging, the kind of place that could hold a family as easily as a weapons cache. They surrounded it, moved in slow, doors splintered under boots, voices shouted, echoing through crumbling rooms. She climbed to the roof for overwatch. From there she could see everything. Dust trails on the horizon, smoke curling from a chimney, the team moving like shadows below. And then screams, not soldiers, not fighters. Children. Her stomach dropped. Through the scope she saw them. Women clutching children pressed into corners, eyes wide with terror. Her radio crackled. Negative weapons confirmed. Repeat, no cache, just civilians. The colonel's voice cut back, sharp. Hold position until further confirmation. We don't pull until I say. Her hand tightened on the radio. She wanted to speak, to shout, to say what everyone already knew, that this mission was wrong, built on false intel, risking lives for shadows. But the words stuck. Because what would they say if she broke her silence now? Would they listen? Or dismiss her again, burying her voice under the weight of their certainty? Below, Ramirez appeared in the courtyard, rifle lowered, guiding a boy out of hiding. The boy's hands trembled, dirt streaked across his cheeks. And then gunfire. Not from the compound, from outside. Dust kicked up on the ridge, bullets tore through the air, fighters, real ones, surrounding the civilians, using them as bait. The trap sprung. Her scope snapped to the ridge. Figures moved fast, rifles flashing. She squeezed the trigger. One fell, then another. She moved with precision, breath steady, each shot breaking the chaos. Below, the team scrambled, shielding civilians, dragging them into cover. Ramirez shouted orders, voice hoarse but clear. But there were too many. Her scope caught a figure moving closer, RPG balanced on his shoulder, aimed straight at the courtyard. She had seconds. Breath in, breath out. The shot cracked. The man dropped, rockets sliding harmlessly to the dirt. But then her scope shifted, and she froze. Another boy, younger this time. No weapon. Just standing there on the ridge, eyes wide, frozen in the middle of the firestorm. Her chest tightened. She could see him so clearly, as if the scope had stripped away everything but him, his fear, his smallness. Her finger hovered. She couldn't shoot, not this time. Sniper, cover the ridge, the captain barked over the radio. She swallowed hard, shifted her aim past the boy, found the fighter behind him, pulled the trigger. The fighter fell. The boy ran. The firefight dragged on, brutal and sharp, until finally the ridge went quiet. Smoke drifted, bodies sprawled. The compound was scarred but standing. Civilians huddled, trembling, alive. The team regrouped. No cash, no weapons, just fear and ash. Back at base, the colonel called it a successful disruption. He wrote it into the reports as evidence of intelligence accuracy. He spoke in numbers, percentages, probabilities. But she couldn't shake the faces. The children, the mothers, the boy on the ridge. Later, Ramirez found her by the wash station. His face was drawn, his hand still shaking faintly as he splashed water on his skin. "That was a mess," he muttered. She didn't answer. He looked at her then, sharp. "You hesitated up there." Her eyes narrowed. "How do you know?" "Because I watched you. I always watch you." Silence stretched. He sighed, leaning against the wall. "I don't blame you. I would have hesitated too. But out here, hesitation," he trailed off, shaking his head. She met his gaze. "Sometimes hesitation is the only thing that keeps us human." He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He just looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face, like he knew the war would strip pieces of it away. That night she wrote a letter to her brother, words she didn't know if she'd ever send. She wrote about silence, about dignity, about the weight of carrying something no one thanked you for. She wrote about the children, about mercy, about the line between strength and cruelty. She folded it carefully, tucked it into her pack. Because maybe one day he would need to know. Maybe one day someone would need to remember that she hadn't been invisible, not to herself, not to the flag, not to the ones who survived because she hesitated. She blew out the lamp, lay in the dark, and let the silence press in again. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of ghosts. And she knew there would be more. Why did her hands shake when she touched the old photographs? No enemy was in sight, no order pressing down, no gunfire filling the air. Just silence and the faded edges of her own memories. She stared at the worn picture tucked into her rucksack, a younger version of herself, standing in uniform beside her father, the flag just a ripple in the wind behind them. His smile, proud yet fragile. That day, she had promised him something she never told the others. And now, out here, knee-deep in a mission that could end badly at any moment, she wondered if she could still keep it. The campfire glowed faintly in the hidden valley. The team was quiet. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Shadows of mountains leaned in close, pressing the cold down on their shoulders. One of the men, Ray's, broke the silence. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't here?" His voice was low, almost afraid to be heard. No one answered at first. Then another soldier, Collins, muttered, "I'd probably be drunk or dead." He forced a chuckle, but it rang hollow. She listened, her eyes still on the photo. They asked no questions of her. They rarely did. They thought she was made of stone, untouchable, but inside she was fighting a storm that none of them could see. Because tomorrow wasn't just another move on the mission map. Tomorrow was the day they would face the ridge, the high ground where the enemy waited. She had seen the outlines through her scope earlier, shapes dug into the earth, rifles glinting just enough to catch her breath. The others didn't know yet. She hadn't told them, not because she wanted to carry the weight alone, but because she needed to time it right. Fear had a way of unraveling men before dawn. Rays threw a twig into the fire. Sparks shot up, scattered, and died into the sky. "You're quiet as always," he said, glancing her way. "What's going on in your head?" She looked up finally. Her lips parted, but no words came. She only shook her head. The truth was there, heavy on her tongue. "I'm afraid. Afraid you'll all break when you see what I saw. Afraid I won't be enough to hold the line." Instead, she tucked the photo deeper into her rucksack, sealing the secret with it. The night stretched on, broken only by restless shifts and the distant sound of an owl echoing across the cliffs. When her turn came to keep watch, she climbed to a small outcrop overlooking the valley. The moon lit the ridges faintly, silver on stone, and for a moment she let herself imagine her father's voice. Calm, certain. "Carry it higher than they ever thought you could. Dignity doesn't need applause, it just needs truth." Her breath fogged in the cold air. She whispered back into the wind, "I'm trying, Dad. I'm still trying." The morning came too soon. A pale light crept across the landscape, brushing everything in a brittle shade of gray. The men stirred, packed, tightened straps, checked rifles. Their faces were unreadable, masks of focus, but beneath she could feel the pulse of their unease. She gathered them before the final climb. "Listen," she said, voice steady. They turned to her, waiting. For once no one interrupted, no one dismissed. The silence gave her space. "Ahead on that ridge there are at least a dozen dug in, maybe more. They know we're coming." The words hit the air like stones thrown into water. Ripples of disbelief, then anger. Collins cursed it under his breath. Ray's clenched his jaw. "And you're just telling us now?" She held his stare. "If I told you last night, none of us would have slept. Now you know, and now we move." The anger simmered, but none of them walked away. They knew she was right, even if it stung. The climb was brutal. Loose rocks slid beneath their boots, breath tearing through lungs, sweat mixing with the chill of dawn. Each step was a question: would they make it before being spotted? Would the ridge swallow them whole? Halfway up, the first shot rang out. A crack that split the morning clean in two. Dust spat near Ray's boot. The team scattered for cover, hearts slamming against ribs. She dropped to her belly, scanning through her scope. There, two shapes shifting along the sandbags above. She exhaled, slow, one squeeze, silence. Then another, silence. The ridge wasn't giving up easily. More fire rained down, ricochets sparking off stone, the roar of rifles filling the air. The men pushed upward in bursts, each one closer to the lip, each one costlier in energy. At one point, Collins froze, pinned by bullets stitching the ground inches from his side. Fear locked his muscles. She saw it, the wide eyes, the shallow breath. In another life, he would have been just a man at a bar, tired of his own regrets. Now he was here, about to become nothing more than a memory. She moved, crawled, positioned herself where the angle was cruel but possible. She whispered, "Not today," and fired. The ridge spat silence back. Collins stumbled up, alive, gratitude hidden but heavy in the way his hand brushed her shoulder as he passed. By the time they reached the top, their bodies ached, their nerves frayed, but they were still breathing, still together. And as they crouched behind the captured ridge, catching their breath, Ray's turned to her. For the first time, his eyes weren't skeptical. They were searching, respectful even. "You knew we'd make it," he said softly. She didn't answer, because the truth was more complicated. She hadn't known. She had only believed that their strength, their bond, could stretch far enough to hold. The flag wasn't in her hands yet. The mission wasn't over. But as the wind cut across the ridge and the valley spread out below, she felt a shift in the air. For the first time, they weren't just following orders. They were following her. And deep inside, where fear and hope collided, she realized something. Dignity wasn't about being seen. It was about choosing to stand, even when no one was watching. What do you do when silence feels heavier than gunfire? The ridge was theirs now, but victory had no warmth. The smoke of spent rounds hung over the ground, bitter in the back of the throat. The men slumped into the dirt, chests heaving, sweat cutting tracks through the dust on their faces. No cheers, no relief, just the sharp edge of survival. She scanned the horizon through her scope. Empty fields stretched on, broken by ridges and valleys, too quiet, too still. Her instincts tightened in her chest. She lowered the rifle and turned to the others. "This isn't it," she said. "They'll come again." Ray's looked up from reloading, jaw tense. "Then why hold here? Why not push?" "Because pushing without knowing what's ahead is suicide." Her words were flat, not sharp. She wasn't arguing, just stating truth. The kind of truth that left no room for pride. Collins spat into the dirt, muttering, "Feels like they're hurting us." No one disagreed. Hours passed. The sun burned high, pressing heat into their helmets. They took turns watching, waiting. Every sound seemed louder than it should. The snap of fabric in the wind, the crackle of their radios, the scrape of boots on rock. She tried to steady her breathing, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the photo in her pack, her father's smile, his last words before the sickness took him. "You don't need to be thanked, just carry it higher." The radio crackled, a distant voice, distorted, unclear. The men leaned in, but static swallowed most of it. Only one phrase cut through: movement, west flank. Her eyes sharpened. She lifted the scope again, sweeping across the ridge line. There, shadows shifting where the ground dipped. Not many, maybe 6, scouts testing their strength. "They're probing us," she said, voice tight. Ray's cursed. "We don't have the ammo for a drawn-out fight." They didn't. Their supplies had been thin since the last drop. Each bullet mattered now. Each decision weighed against the chance of never making it home. The scouts came closer, bold in their movement. The team tensed, ready, but she lifted a hand, stopping them. "Not yet." Her eyes followed the scouts, watched how they moved, where they looked, how long they lingered. She wasn't watching soldiers. She was watching patterns, reading intent like words on a page. When she finally whispered, "Now," the valley cracked with precision. Short bursts, measured, controlled. The scouts fell before they could return fire. Silence again, sharper than before. But silence wasn't safety, it was warning. As night crept in, they huddled close, the air colder, their breaths visible in the dark. Collins fidgeted with his canteen. "You ever think we're just pawns out here, like we bleed so someone else can move a line on a map?" His voice trembled, but he tried to cover it with a smirk. She didn't answer right away. She thought of her father, of promises made to the dead, of the weight of a flag no one saw but her. Finally, she said, "Maybe, but pawns can still protect the king, or each other." Collins stared at her, something shifting in his eyes. He didn't smirk again. When her watch came, she stood at the ridge's edge. The stars were faint, swallowed by the black of the sky. She listened to the world breathe, waiting for the sound that didn't belong. It came just before dawn, a faint shuffle, then another. She pressed her cheek to the scope. The horizon rippled with movement, not 6 this time, dozens, maybe more, an entire wave crawling through the gray. Her chest tightened. She thought of waking the others, but something in her stopped. She needed a moment alone with what she saw, with what it meant. Because if the ridge fell, so would they. And if they held, it would be because she carried them through the storm. She whispered into the dawn, the same words she had whispered as a girl when fear wrapped its hands around her throat. "Stand anyway." Then she turned and shook Ray's awake. His eyes widened when he saw her face. He didn't need words to know. By the time the first light touched the valley, they were ready. Each man at his position, each magazine checked twice. No jokes, no chatter, just hearts thundering in unison. The wave broke against the ridge like a storm at sea. Gunfire cracked. Shouts rose. The ground shook under the weight of boots and bullets. She fired until her shoulder ached, reloaded, fired again. Dust choked the air, ears rang with the roar. Collins yelled out, left sides thinning, and she swung her scope, found the breach, cut it down. Ray's barked orders, but his voice was raw, barely holding. They fought as one body, each piece leaning on the others. Fear didn't vanish, it simply became fuel. When the smoke began to clear, bodies littered the slope below. The wave had broken. They had held, but the cost lay heavy. One man was down, blood pooling dark beneath him. Another sat with his head in his hands, trembling too hard to hold his rifle. She moved among them, steady, calm. Not a hero, not untouchable, just a presence that anchored them. Rays looked at her, his face gray with exhaustion. "You kept us standing." She shook her head. "We kept each other standing." But inside, she felt the truth clawing at her chest. If she hadn't been here, if she hadn't seen, hadn't steadied, would they have made it? Or would this ridge have swallowed every name, every breath, every promise? The flag wasn't raised yet. The mission wasn't done. But as she knelt to close the eyes of the fallen, she knew something had changed. They were no longer questioning why she was here. They were only grateful that she was. And still she carried the photo. Still she whispered silently to her father. Still the promise burned, carry it higher. Why did victory feel like failure? The ridge was quiet now, but silence no longer meant safety. It meant absence of voices, of laughter, of men who had stood here only hours before. She sat with her back against a cold rock, her rifle across her knees, staring at the empty helmet placed carefully beside her. It belonged to Keller, the one who hadn't made it through the night. His absence felt louder than the gunfire that had taken him. The others gave her space. Maybe they thought she needed it. Maybe they didn't know what to say. She didn't blame them. What words could ever carry the weight of the dead? When Reyes finally broke the silence, his voice was raw. "We can't stay here. They'll regroup." She nodded. He was right. But moving meant carrying more than gear. It meant carrying guilt. They packed in silence. Collins lingered longer over Keller's helmet than anyone expected. His hands trembled as he set it down gently, like he was afraid even the gesture might shatter something fragile. When he looked up, his eyes found hers. "I thought he'd outlive me." The words were cracked, childlike. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That war didn't choose fairly. That survival was never about worth. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Just pressure. Just presence. Sometimes silence spoke louder than comfort. The descent from the ridge was slow, each step a reminder of how fragile their grip on survival had become. The valley stretched ahead, shadows moving with the sun, every bend a possible ambush. Their supplies were thin, their strength thinner. By midday, heat pressed against them like a weight. The air shimmered, dust clinging to their tongues. They stopped only briefly, drinking rationed sips of warm water. Reyes spread the map against a flat rock. "The drop zone is here," he said, finger stabbing at a patch of green that looked impossibly far. "If we make it, we resupply. If we do—" No one finished the sentence. She studied the map, her eyes narrowing. The drop zone was more than just survival. It was where the flag waited, not a symbol on paper. A real flag carried in by the last supply run, wrapped in cloth, meant to be raised when the mission was done. She hadn't told them why that mattered to her. Not yet. As they moved again, her mind drifted back to her father. To the hospital room where machines hummed softly, where his voice had been little more than a whisper. "Promise me," he had said, his hand gripping hers with what strength he had left. "Promise me you'll carry it higher than I ever could." She hadn't understood then how heavy promises could be. Now, with every step, she felt the weight of it pressing harder against her ribs. By late afternoon, the terrain shifted. The valley narrowed into a choke point of rock and scrub. Her instincts screamed. She raised a hand, stopping the column. The others froze, eyes scanning. Then it came, a shot cracked, echoing off stone. Collins dropped to the ground, not hit but stunned. More fire followed, bursts from hidden positions. Ambush. They scattered for cover, rocks splintering under the barrage. Reyes shouted orders, his voice barely cutting through the noise. She pressed against the earth, scanning for muzzle flashes. There, a glint between two boulders. She fired once, twice. The glint vanished. But the enemy was dug in. Numbers unknown, positions hidden. The valley had become a cage. Her pulse hammered. This wasn't just about survival now. If they died here, the flag would never be raised. Her father's promise would wither in the dirt with her. She crawled closer to Reyes, bullets stitching the ground near them. "We can't stay pinned. We need a flank." Reyes spat blood from a cut on his lip. "You volunteering?" She didn't answer. Her silence was enough. The crawl was brutal. Every inch forward meant stones scraping against her arms, dirt grinding into her face. She moved like shadow, pressing low, inching toward the far side of the choke. Bullets cracked overhead, but she didn't falter. Finally, she reached a shallow rise. From here, the enemy positions revealed themselves. Faint shapes tucked into the rocks, rifles braced, eyes fixed on her team. She steadied her breath. One shot, then another. She moved positions, another shot, precision, not fury. She wasn't here to win a war. She was here to create space for them for survival. And it worked. The fire shifted, drawn to her. Rays and the others surged forward, using the opening to push through the choke point. Shouts rose, dust exploded, the valley turned into chaos. She kept firing until her last magazine was nearly empty. Then she slid back, retreating the same way she'd come, heart pounding, lungs burning. By the time she rejoined the team, they had broken through. The ambush was behind them, though the scars would stay. Rays looked at her, breath ragged, eyes wide. "You saved us again." She shook her head. "We saved each other." The words were habit now, but her chest tightened with doubt. She knew how close it had been, how thin the line was between survival and silence. That night they camped in a shallow ravine. No fire, just cold rations and darker thoughts. Collins sat apart, his back to the wall, staring into nothing. When she approached, he didn't look up. "You okay?" she asked. He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Okay. Keller's gone, we're half dead, and I don't even know if we'll see that flag again." She crouched beside him, her voice was low, steady. "You'll see it, I'll make sure of it." For the first time he turned to her, eyes glistening in the dim light. "Why does it matter so much to you? That flag, you never told us." Her throat tightened. The words pressed hard, threatening to break free, but she held them back. Not yet. The promise was hers alone until the moment came. She only said, "Because it matters more than me." Colin studied her face, searching for something he couldn't name. Finally, he nodded, accepting an answer he didn't understand. When she lay down that night, the stars sharp against the black sky, she touched the photo in her rucksack. Her father's smile, his last request. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "Almost there, Dad, almost." But sleep didn't come easily, because she knew tomorrow wasn't just another march. Tomorrow was the last stretch, the drop zone, the flag, the moment everything would either break or rise higher than any of them imagined. What image lingers in the mind when the end feels near? For her, it was the flag, not cloth, not color, but a promise stitched into every thread. She saw it in her mind as clearly as if it were waving before her eyes, even while her boots dragged through the last stretch of dirt and stone. The drop zone was close, too close to give up, too far to reach without pain. Their bodies carried bruises, cuts, exhaustion that clung like lead. Each man moved like he was being pulled forward by something unseen: hunger, memory, stubborn will. For her, it was her father's voice: "Carry it higher." When they crested the final rise, the drop zone came into view, or what was left of it. The supply crates were scattered, some burst open, parachutes tangled in the trees. Smoke curled faintly from a burned patch of ground. Too quiet. Her gut twisted. Rays raised his fist, halting the team. His eyes swept the scene, suspicion heavy in the air. Collins muttered, "Feels wrong." It was, they all knew it, but turning back wasn't an option. They moved carefully, rifles up, scanning every shadow. The wind tugged at the ruined parachutes, fabric snapping like distant gunfire. Every sound made their nerves twitch. Then they found it, the crate, intact. Inside, ammo, water, medical kits, and wrapped carefully at the bottom, the flag, clean, untouched, waiting. Her breath caught when she saw it. She reached out, fingertips brushing the cloth, and for a heartbeat the war vanished. She was a child again, standing beside her father at a parade, his hand steady on her shoulder as the colors rippled above them. Pride swelling so fiercely it hurt. But the moment shattered with a crack, a shot. Collins cried out, dropping to one knee. Blood seeped between his fingers. Ambush. They dove for cover, gunfire tearing the air apart. Shadows moved at the edge of the zone, figures closing in, disciplined, relentless. Not scouts, not chance. They had been waiting. Rays barked orders, returning fire, dragging Collins behind cover. The others scrambled, fighting to hold the perimeter. She pressed against the crate, the flag still in her grip. For a second she hesitated. The logical choice was to leave it, fight with both hands free, but her chest burned with the memory of her father's plea. She couldn't. Not now. Tucking the flag tight under her arm, she rose and fired, each shot measured, controlled. The enemy pressed harder, bullets shredding the air, dirt kicking up around them. "Too many," Reyes shouted. His voice cracked with the weight of truth. She saw it then, the line. If they stayed, they would fall. If they broke, the mission died with them. Someone had to decide, someone had to carry it through. Her eyes found Reyes. For the first time she spoke without hesitation. "Get them out." He stared at her, realization dawning. "What are you?" "Get them out." Her voice cut sharp, leaving no room for argument. Collins groaned, clutching his wound. The others looked between them, torn, but Reyes knew. He saw the fire in her eyes, the weight she was ready to carry. "Damn it," he whispered, then louder to the team, "Fall back, move." They obeyed, dragging Collins, firing in bursts as they retreated toward cover. She stayed, alone, rifle steady, flag pressed against her chest. Each shot was a wall, each pause a prayer. The enemy surged, but she didn't falter. The fight became a blur, gunfire, shouting, smoke thick in the air. Her arms ached, ears rang, vision blurred. Still she stood. Still she carried. When the last magazine emptied, silence pressed in, broken only by distant footsteps. She sank to one knee, flag clutched tight, breath ragged. And then the strangest thing. The enemy stopped. They saw her, a single figure in the dirt, flag in her arms, defiant even in exhaustion. Their rifles lowered, hesitation rippling through them. For a moment no one moved. No one spoke. Even war seemed to pause. Because dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it simply stands. She didn't know how long she held their gaze. Seconds, hours, forever. Then a shout in the distance, orders barked. The enemy withdrew, fading back into the smoke. Her knees buckled. Darkness pressed at the edges of her sight. She clung to the flag like it was breath itself. And as her body gave way, she whispered into the silence, "I carried it, Dad, higher than they thought." When Reyes and the others returned, the zone was empty of enemies. They found her collapsed, flag still wrapped tight against her chest, face pale but peaceful. Alive, barely. They lifted her gently, no words spoken. Reyes took the flag from her hands, holding it with reverence, but it was clear. It was hers. It had always been hers. When they raised it at the final outpost days later, battered and scarred, it wasn't the flag alone that waved in the wind. It was her dignity, stitched into every thread. No speeches were given, no medals pinned, just silence, and in that silence truth lived. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in the quiet that followed, as the cloth rippled higher than anyone had imagined, they all knew she had carried more than a mission. She had carried them all.